Yeah, welcome back. In this session, we are going to be looking at CSS syntax and selectors. There's a way you write CSS, and this picture, which I got from tutorial points, explain the way CSS syntax are always written and CSS is always written. Now, you see that the first thing here, you have the selector, where you select the element that you want to style. In this case, they are selecting the element by the element name or by the tag name, and that shows they are styling the table. So this is the selector. So you select the element you want to tag because you need to be specific. You need to specify the element that you want to tag. And in this case, I or they want to style the table element, and that's why they are selecting. So this is the selector. And now after the selector, you now open a curly braces. The curly braces is what we call the declaration. So where you declare the property, and the declaration always it's like a key value pair where you define the key, which is the CSS property that you want to apply to the HTML element, and the value is now the property that you want to assign. Is now the exact style that you want to assign to that particular HTML element. So the selector, the declaration, and the declaration as a property together with the value. Now you see that you have been doing that before. Here we selected this is our selector, we in this case the HTML element, and in here we have the declaration in a curly braces, and in the declaration we have the property. In this case, the color is the property, and the value is that we want the value to be color blue. We want the value to be color blue. Now that is the syntax of CSS. Now going forward, now we have different ways by which you can select the element that you want to style. The first selector that we have is the universal selector. So we have the universal selector, the element selector, the class selector, the ID selector, group selector, descendant selector, child selector, adjacent sibling selector, and so on like that. And we are going to be looking at examples of all the selectors in this section. So the first one, which is the universal selector, is that you want to select all the elements on the page irrespective of the name, irrespective of the tag, irrespective of the class. Most of the time we use it to set our page to set to default styling. So sometimes maybe you have, so don't forget I've linked the CSS, so I'll be writing the CSS here, or I can just, yeah, so let me just copy this first one, then I come here. So the first thing we are doing here is, let me see if I can zoom in more. Now if I comment this, so the first thing we are doing here is universal selector. So if to select all the elements on the page, you use this asterisk sign. Use asterisk sign, and most of the time we use to set, maybe you want to set the margin, you don't want some funny margin to be disturbing your styling, so you want to set the margin to 0, and we are still going to look at the meaning of margin later on. So padding to 0, and the style we apply to all the elements on the page. But to make it more visible, let's just add some elements to this our HTML page. Let's just add h2 elements lorem 3 this time around, and maybe we add the paragraph to be maybe 100 modes of 30, and let's see, we have button, and we say click me, and we have that on our page. Oh, let me just break it so that we have some space. Let me just break it. Now even before I break it, let's see something. Let me comment this out for now, so that you see that the universal selector is actually doing its work. So if I come back to the CSS now, let's say I comment this out. I want, you can see that by default, even though I've commented out the break line or the break point, I have some spacing, like in between the heading, the paragraph, there's some spacing. But because I selected all the elements and I remove all the margin, I remove all the page, all the padding, which is majorly for spacing, which you are going to look at, which you are going to look at later. It remove all the, you can see now that all the spacing removed because of this universal selector. Now let's see with this universal selector, if I say okay, the color, which I think you are now familiar with, like we use it to style the color of the text. Let's say I want the color to be orange this time around. If I save, all the elements on the web page is going to have color orange because I use this universal selector. So if you want to select all the elements on the web page, you use this asterisk sign. So that's the first CSS selector. Now the second CSS selector is the element selector. That means that you select the element or the HTML element that you want to style by the name of the tag. By the name of the tag. Don't forget that we have p tag for paragraph, we have div tag for container, we have h1 to h6 for header, we have table tag for creating table, so and so on and so forth. So any element that you want to style, you can select them by the name of the tag, and that is the second one, which is the element selector. You select it by the name of the tag. Let's say I want to style only the paragraph, then I'll select it using the name of the tag, which is p. So if I want to select it, I'll just say p, and the p here will now be okay. Let me say I want to also, let's see, let me just still limit it to color this time for now. So I want it to be this color. So you can see that the paragraph that I have here has taken the color that I've defined here. So if let's say I define another paragraph, so all this style is going to be applied to all the paragraphs. So let me just say this is another paragraph. It's another paragraph. Let me create the spacing now because I've removed the, so that we can see it now. So I can see that this, and create this now. You can see that this paragraph and this, it selects all the paragraphs on the page and it give it the color aqua. Now that is that about. So if let's say I want to select button, then the same things apply. I'll just say button, which is the name of the tag, and maybe I want to increase the height. I can increase the height to, let's say I want to increase the height to maybe 34 pixel. So you can see that the height has increased. Why? Because I selected this element's name, which is button, and I define a property for it, and the property applies to it. So now that is that about element selector. So we also have class selector. That means that you can select elements based on the name of the class, and this is the most popular way of selecting HTML element anytime you want to style it, because if you say you should select it by the tag name, then you might be using another paragraph on your web page where you don't want this color to be applied, but because you have generalized it, it is going to apply to all the paragraph. But in this case, you can just, okay, it's only the paragraph tag that has this class name that I want them to have this color. So this is the most popular or most common, especially when it comes to when it comes to CSS styling. So now how do you do that? So that means that, okay, let me just say, so you can define your, okay, let me come here again. Okay, let me remove that spacing. I think we have sent that in action. Let me just comment it out, and I just save. It's giving me, it's making me, okay. Now let's just say div, and I have some, okay, let me use what I've created before. Okay, so now you can define a class property. Don't forget, in our HTML we define a class property. Let's say I want this class to be, I want it to take text to be blue. I want the text to be blue. So I can define this class name, and make sure that your class name is always descriptive. So maybe I want the text to be blue. I define it and I come to my CSS. Then to select this element by its class name, I have two options. Is that I go with h2 dot text blue. This means that all the h2 elements that has a class of text blue, apply to it. Then I can decide, okay, I'm not applying to only the h2 element, any element that has class text blue I want to apply to it. And I'll just say dot the name of the class, and I'll open my declaration. So just take note of the fact that anytime you see a dot, in front of your selector, then you should know that you are selecting that element by the name of the class. Selecting the element by the name of the class. So if you want to restrict it to a particular element, then you can now say the name of the element dot the class. So let's define it now. Let's say color now to be blue. So in that case, it's going text blue. Text blue in that case. Okay, if I comment this out, and if I put the color here, color blue. Oh, I see. Now the yeah, sorry about that. It's actually because it's live server that it's trying to show itself, so I have to come here and reload before this style was applied. So I think the problem was with live server was not reloading automatically, so as expected. So this stuff still applies. So if I comment this out, so and I save, then the color stays. So if I change this to maybe red and I save, then you can see that I have the color to be red. So now, so that's that about that. So you can also, okay, you can also limit it to text. Okay, let me use text red now, and let me change this to blue. So this is just a way of limiting it to a particular tag that has this class. So let me say text class text red, and I make the color to be red. So any class, any HTML element that has this class, then this property will be applied. So let me say I come here and maybe I apply a class here. Let's see if this will take preference. So if I save it and I come and refresh, you can see that I have my that paragraph that has a class of text red. The color is now red because I selected the element with the class name and I added the property of color with a value of red to it. Alright, moving forward with our selectors in CSS, we also have ID selector, which we are going to be considering now. So we have the ID selector, and let's just follow the same format now. The same way you're able to select an element with the class name, you can also select an element with the name of the ID. So if you come here and okay, I define a div, for example, a div here, and I give it a property of ID. Just like you are able to define a property of class, you can define a property of ID. Now the difference between class and ID is that you can have a class, maybe the same way you use a class of text blue here, you can come here again and see assign the class text blue to this particular element. Come here again and see assign the class of text blue to this particular, so you can use it several times. But for ID, it is not right for you to use several times. So once you define an ID of okay, maybe this is div, maybe this is like div, let's just say div1, you should not assign another div with the ID of div1 again, because ID should be a unique identifier that is only unique or peculiar to a particular element, and not just using it several times like the class. So if you need to use a property several times, or you need to apply it to different elements, then you should use class. That's why I say class is the most popular anytime you are doing this thing. But if you need to just have one unique identifier, assign it to a particular element, you should be using ID. So as the case may be, so we have defined a div with ID div1, and let's just put some, okay, let's see our list, another list now. Let's say list item, and let's just say item 1, duplicate it, this is 3 and this is 2. Now if we come here and to select this div, so to select this div, you just copy that ID name, and to select a particular element by the ID, instead of you to use dots as you are doing for class, you use hash the name of the ID, and you define the declaration, the property. Let's say the property, let's still limit as, okay, let's use width this time around. So let's define the width of the element. Okay, let's give it some background. So but before that, let's just see it show up on our web page. For okay, let me just comment it. Let's just see it show up on our web page. It's not showing up, so there's a need for us to refresh. Okay, it's now showing up. This is the ID with div1. So let's give it a background color. Let's give it a background color. Don't forget we are selecting by the name of the ID. So, and to select by ID, you put hash in front of the name, you put hash in front of the selector, and you define that value of the ID that you want to select. So let's just give it a background color of maybe orange. If I see, you can see that that div has a background color of orange because I selected it with the ID. So that is that about selecting an element with the ID. So you can also have a group selector. A group selector is, okay, maybe you have defined a property. Sometimes maybe you have defined a property, and instead of it to, let's see it in action. So instead of maybe you have class of div1, for example, and you give it a color of red, for example, and the same class of div2, you also give it another color of the same color red, and you have class of div3 and you give it the same color red. Now this is not professional in CSS because you have the same declaration for different classes. Why not just group them together and let them have that property? So to group them together, all you just need to do is just come here, put a comma, then have div and have a class of div. So this is the first method of doing it. Like you are repeating yourself, color red for different classes or different properties. And this applies to selecting by ID, selecting by elements too. In this case, I'm just showing you with the name of the class. So this is method one of doing it, which is not right, or which is not, it will work, but it's not professional. So the right way for you to do it using the group selector is, you should rather say, okay, div1, put a comma, because I want to select multiple classes because they have the same property. So then put another class div2, then put another class div3. Then in this case, I'm selecting the three as a group and I'm assigning them the property of color, and I want their color to be red. So this is a group selector that you should have. This the purpose you're able to achieve here, you will achieve it, you have achieved the same thing with this, but this is the right thing to do so that it will shorten the length or the number of lines of CSS that you are going to be writing. So that is group selector, where you use comma to select multiple elements that has the same property or the same declaration. So let me remove this, as this is the right thing to do. It also applies to maybe you have heading 1, heading 2, and paragraph, and maybe you want them to have maybe background color of maybe red. So if I save, you see something on our web page now. So you can see that the heading 1, the heading 2, the paragraph all have, I think this one has a color of that cannot show on red as well. So I think color of red too. So they have a background of red because I group them, I selected them as a group, and I applied the property to them at a go, and everything power up for all the elements. So that is group selection, but I'm going to remove this and leave the previous one there for you to see. Now we go to the next one, which is the descendant selector. So descendant selector means that if you want to select an element that is a child of a particular parent element, for example, if you look at this div, this div is the parent to on ordered list, and this unordered list is the parent of list item. So the same way you are nesting it. So if you maybe you have a div, this div is the parent and it has a child of paragraph. That's the child of paragraph. Now this paragraph too, it can has a child of strong, strong too. So this div is now the grandparent, or yeah, grandparent of this child of strong. So where this is the parent and this is the descendant, this is another. So as you're nesting it inside each other, then it become a child of that parent element. So now let's say this is a strong task, put this for lack of words. Now you can see that we have a div, we have a paragraph, and we have a strong element. So let's say you want to select a paragraph that is a child to a div. You use descendant selector. You don't just want to select any paragraph, but you want a one that is actually peculiar to, it must be a child to a div. That means it must has a div as a parent form. Then for you to do that, you just need to write the element div. It can be the class, it can be the ID, but you select it and based on using the right selector or your desired selector. So but in this case I'm selecting with the elements name. So div and I put space. This means that it will select a paragraph that is a child to a div. So a rapid. So this is descendant selector. So let's say I make this to be let's make this to be font size. Let's just increase the size. Font size to increase size. So let me just make it a very big text, maybe 150 pixel. So if I save, of course it's not showing. Let me refresh. You can see text is very big, very big. So let's just reduce it to 15. Now take note of the fact that, okay, let me make it different from other text. Now you can see that apart from the fact that this is a paragraph, yes, but we have other paragraphs on the page. This style only applies to this paragraph because we make it to be that it's only the paragraph that has a div as a parent. Other paragraphs on the page like this does not have a div as a parent. This one too does not have a div as a parent. So anytime you want to select a descendant of a particular element, then you use space. So once you write the element, you put space, then you write the child element, and that is descendant selector. All right, moving forward with our selector, we consider the child selector now. The child selector is almost the same with the descendant selector, just that the syntax too might be different, but the same way you are selecting a child with the descendant selector, then you're also selecting the child element with descendant selector. So just like, let me just use this example. So the same way you put space, you can just put this greater than sign to select the child of the div. So but in this case I will just create a div, another div now. Instead of me to even instead of the div to have a child of paragraph, they are going to have a child of span, and I'm going to have a lorem 10, and I just duplicate this. Now if I save, so now I'm going to be selecting the child of that div, and that is going to be the span. And let's say I want to give it a background color. Let me just give it a color of red. If I save, now, oh, why now? Yeah. So let me refresh so that I see my changes. You can see now that all the child of that div that are span, you can see that it's not separating because span is an inline element, so everything is going to be on the same line. So that is selecting all the child of a particular parent. So you use this greater than sign, or you can decide to, let's see the difference between this space and the greater than sign. So it's still the same thing. So the same way you can select the child using space, the parent element and the child element, or you can separate it using this greater than. Whichever way, just make sure it work for you. Anyone that work for you, it's fine. So the next one now is the uh, adjacent sibling selector. That's why that means the sibling that they are side by side, they are beside each other. So let's say I have a div. I have a div. This is a div now, for example. Now let's say I have another paragraph in here. Let's call it paragraph one, and let's create another one, paragraph two. So, and I want to select only the paragraph that is next to this div, and not just all the paragraph, just the paragraph that is next to this particular div. And then how will I do that? I will use the selector called adjacent sibling selector. That means the sibling, or the element that are on the same level and they are beside each other. So that's what we do. So let's say I want to select the div, and to select the adjacent sibling, sibling, I need to use the plus sign. So let me just say the color is, let's say the color this time around is any color with the purple. Yeah, let's use purple. And if I save, yeah, you can see now that it only pick the first paragraph, does not pick the second paragraph, because I only want to select the sibling that is immediately next to this div. Okay, let's see something in action now. Let's see, in between the div and paragraph, I create another span here, and I make this to be a random text of 2. If I save, you can see that the style is not applied. It will only apply if it is immediately next to that parent, to that particular element. So they must be beside each other without anything separating them. So if I remove this now, the color purple will now apply now. So if you want to style elements that are beside each other, then you use the adjacent sibling selector with the plus sign. Now we also have another one, which is the general sibling selector. General sibling selector, that means you want to select all the, instead of you to select the first one, you want to select all the paragraphs that they are on the same, all the elements. Let me know this paragraph now, because it does not only apply to paragraph. If you want to select all the elements that are on the same level with that parent element, then you select all, instead of you to select the first one that is immediately next. So you use the general sibling selector, and the symbol for general sibling selector is div, and you use this sign that is beside your one or below your escape key on your keyboard. So shift, it's or at the top of backtick, we call it backtick, but just select shift and that sign beside your one key on your keyboard. So this is used to select, so this symbol is used to select the general sibling, or instead of you to select the first one, you select all. You can see that this purple only apply to the first one. But if I want to select, oh, let's say, and I give it a color of, oh yeah, yellow this time around, yellow. If I save now, you can see that the style apply, it's even override the first one. It's applied to all the siblings instead of the first one that applied to only the first. So this one is the general sibling, that's they're on the same level, all the elements are on the same level, and this one is the first one that is immediately next to it. Now the next selector, and it's applied to classes, to ID, depends on you. Now we have the attribute selector. You can also select an element using its attributes, just like this is a class attribute. And don't forget, in our HTML session we look at input element that has different attributes. So let's see that in action now. Let's just create a form. As you know that your input element should be wraparound form. So let's not compromise that standard. A type of text, let's limit it to this now, and let's now duplicate it and maybe make this a type of email. If I save, you should see something on the screen. Input elements, they are inline elements, so that's why you are seeing them. But let me make them to be on a separate line. Let me make them to be on a separate line. So this is just HTML. So if you are not familiar with what I'm doing, just go through the HTML series, and I move this here. Okay, I move this here, and let's say I want to, okay, if I save now, they should be on a separate line. Okay, let me just break it once so that I have space. Yeah, let me also break this place to once so that I have space. Yeah, so that I can see what we are doing. Now this is relating what you have on the text. We are not labeling it because we just want to style. So let's not waste time labeling. Now the first one is type of text. The second one is type of email. Let's say I want to select the first one, but notice I did not put any property of class, I did not put any property of ID, and I don't want to select with the input. I want to select the property. Now to select the property, let's see how to do that. So property selector, you can select any property. It can be anything, but in this case I want to select the property of type of text input. So to select with the property, you just need to choose a square bracket, and you just define the property name, in this case type, and the property value to be text. That means that any element that has a property of type with the value of text, then apply this type to it. Let me make the height to be maybe 30. If 30 will be too much, let's make it 20. You can see now that, okay, I think the difference is not very clear. Let me make it 30. Now see, the one that has a type of text, the height has increased. Why the one that does not have a type of text, the height remain unchanged? Why? Because I selected the element with the property. So let's say you have a property of name. In name is maybe first name, for example, and you want to select with the property of first name. All you just need to do is just come here and have a square bracket, then you say name is equals to first name. So it's going to select the element that has name as first name. So let me remove the height from here. Okay, let me put width here this time around. Let me put the width to be 56 pixels. If that will be, so yeah, you can see that the size reduced. Why? Because I selected it with the property of name. So it can be any property, just specify the name of the property together with the value. Now moving forward, the next selector that we have is the pseudo-class selector. Now there are some properties that, for example, now when you click on this, when you move your mouse on top of this button, this is called over. When you click on this input element, this is called active. So all these property, you can use them to style your HTML element, and those properties are called pseudo-classes. Let's take, for example, let me use the button, for example, and okay, let me copy this following the same convention, move this. Now I come here, pseudo classes, and maybe I say, okay, the button, and because I'm using the pseudo classes, I'll do full column. Maybe I want when the user over is when you move your mouse on it. So let me say I want to change the color of the text to red when the user over the button. If I save now, if I move my mouse, that's a property pseudo class. Okay, if I move my mouse, you can see that when my mouse is on top of this button, the color change to red because I use the pseudo class of over. Now we also have other pseudo classes like maybe first child, last child, nth child. And now let's just choose this. Let me comment this out and let's see. Let's use the div that we have created. Okay, no, let me not comment this. Let me comment out the span. Now we have the div maybe the first child. I want to select the first child of the div, and I want to make the color to be maybe something brown, for example. Brown. If I save, I want to remove. Okay, yeah, this is the span body. Let me make it something more visible. Okay, I think I've commented it out. Let me go and comment it. Yeah, it's still active, so it's still active, but let me just make it something unique. Yellow, for example. Okay, let me refresh. I think refresh. So let me see span. Yeah, the first and last child pseudo class is just okay. Maybe for example, I want to select div a span that is the first child of its parents, a d that is the first child of its parents. Then you use the first class. Let's say okay, for example, if you look at these elements now, this div, this span, the parents is div, and the first child of this particular this span is the first child of its parents. So if I want to style it, I'll just say okay, span that is the first child of its parents, then give it a background color of maybe red. If I save it, I can see that if the span has the first child of its parents, give it a background color of red. And let's say I want to style the span that is the last child of its parents, then I'll use the background color of maybe blue. And I say we can start the one that is the last child of the parent. It give you so first child. You can also have nth child. So let's say I want to style the paragraph that is the nth child, and I'm going to be passing the okay. Let me say the first or the second child. I'm going to say background color. Let me use target blue this time around. Yeah, no paragraph that is the first, that is the second child of its parents. Now let's properly create it so that we see it in action. So let me just wrap this paragraph in a div, and I just move it and save it, and you can see now that the one that is the second child, let's give it a background color because this is the parent and this is the child. So this is the first child, second child. So that is that. We move on in the next. Yeah, before we finally call it a wrap for the select CSS selector, let's look at the last selector, which is the pseudo element. Pseudo elements, let's just put it here, which is the last commonly used one. Of course, we definitely might have other ones, but the most popularly used ones. So if it's just almost the same with the pseudo element, but this one is that let's select it with the class name dot. I believe you are familiar with this now. So let's say I want to select the first line of this paragraph. So I just do a double column instead of a one column. So let's say I just say first line. Okay, we can also have the first letter. So let's say I want to make the first line to be color maybe color blue. Then I will select using the pseudo element. So if I save it, I can see that the first line has it color as color blue. So pseudo element. So just like you can select first line, you can select the first letter. And if you want to get to know more about what you can do, so let me just copy this paragraph one, selecting it as a class, put the double column, and you can see you can select the after, backdrop, before, content, cure, marker, part, but you can select the placeholder if it's import element, and can just check to see what is possible. But you can also select the first letter. Maybe you want to put some content before it, like you can just put it before. Like maybe you want to put the content, and you can just say the content that you want to put before the element is maybe you want to label it as paragraph one, for example, paragraph one. And if you save it, you can see that you have paragraph one in front of it. So that's about that. So you can also even put content after, even with just the power of CSS. You can put content after, and you can just say after, and just say maybe pay to read more. pay to read more or to continue reading. Maybe it's a paid article. So you can just, at the end of the story, you can just say pay to continue reading. And if you save it, you can see that at the end of the paragraph, it adds the contents pay to continue. So all these are possible, all these are many more are possible using the power of pseudo classes. Using the power of pseudo classes, and that is the summary, or that is the major selector that is being used in CSS, universal element, and so on and so forth. So in case you see all these elements, maybe you see greater than, you see plus, and you see space in a particular CSS code, you should know, or you see a comma, you should know what they are doing by now. Thank you.